The notification popped up on my phone at 2:47 a.m. and my blood turned to ice. Chen had sent me a friend request on Facebook. After 12 years of absolute silence, he wanted back into my life, into our daughter's life. I stared at his profile picture in the blue glow of my phone screen, my hands trembling as I held the device above my sleeping husband David's chest. There Marcus was, older now, wearing what looked like an expensive suit, standing in front of some gleaming office building in downtown Seattle. Success had found him, apparently. Money had found him. Everything he claimed he didn't have when I was 19, scared and pregnant in our cramped apartment in Portland. My finger hovered over the accept button, but I couldn't bring myself to tap it. Not yet. Not when accepting that request would mean opening a door I'd worked so hard to close. A door that protected the fragile peace I'd built with David and our daughter Emma in our quiet suburban home in Beaverton. You see, Emma doesn't know David isn't her biological father. She's never questioned why she has my dark eyes instead of his blue ones, or why she inherited my grandmother's stubborn chin instead of his gentle features. At 12 years old, she calls David Dad, with such pure love and trust that it makes my heart ache with both joy and guilt. He's been there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every parent-teacher conference. He walked her to her first day of kindergarten, taught her to ride a bike and stayed up all night with her when she had the flu last winter. Marcus disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant. But before that moment, I thought I knew what love was. I met Chen in the fall of 2011 at Portland Community College, in Professor Henderson's Introduction to Psychology class. I was 20, working 2 jobs to pay for school, living in a studio apartment that smelled perpetually of the Thai restaurant downstairs. Marcus sat 3 rows behind me, and for the first month of class, I only knew him as the guy who asked really thoughtful questions and had the kind of laugh that made everyone else smile. He was beautiful in that effortless way that some people just are, mixed Korean and Irish heritage that had given him striking features, dark hair that always looked perfectly messy, and these intense brown eyes that seemed to see everything. But more than his looks, it was his intelligence that drew me in. He read philosophy for fun, could quote Kerouac from memory, and had opinions about movies I'd never even heard of. Please hit the subscribe button, like and comment. Our first real conversation happened in October outside the campus coffee shop. I was juggling 3 textbooks, a coffee, and my phone when everything went tumbling to the sidewalk in a spectacular display of clumsiness. Marcus appeared out of nowhere, helping me gather my scattered belongings. Cognitive psychology, he said, reading the spine of one of my books. Henderson's really piling it on this semester, huh? Tell me about it. I swear I'm reading more for this one class than I did in all of high school. He smiled and I felt something flutter in my chest. I'm Marcus, by the way. I sit behind you in Henderson's class. I've been working up the courage to talk to you for weeks. Linda. And courage? Really? I would have thought someone like you would have plenty of confidence. Someone like me? I felt heat rise in my cheeks. You know, attractive, smart, always has something interesting to say in class discussions. His smile widened. You think I'm attractive and smart? Don't let it go to your head. But it was too late. We were both grinning and there was something electric in the air between us. Can I buy you another coffee? To replace the one you spilled when I startled you? You didn't startle me. I'm just naturally graceful. I can see that, he said, gesturing at the psychology textbook I was still holding upside down. That coffee turned into a 3-hour conversation about everything and nothing. Our families, our dreams, our fears, our favorite books and worst movies, and the places we wanted to travel someday. Marcus had grown up in Eugene with his Korean mother and Irish-American father, both professors at the University of Oregon. He was studying business but dreaming of starting his own company, something that would let him travel and be his own boss. I told him about growing up in Portland with parents who worked double shifts to make ends meet, about my dreams of becoming a teacher, about how I was the first person in my family to go to college and how that felt both exciting and terrifying. You're going to be an amazing teacher, he said when I finished explaining my education major. I can tell just from listening to you talk. You have this way of making complicated things sound simple and interesting. You think so? I know so. Your future students are going to be lucky to have you. It was the kind of conversation that made me feel seen in a way I never had before. Marcus didn't just listen to my words. He heard the meaning behind them, understood the dreams I was too scared to say out loud, made me feel like my thoughts and opinions mattered. By December we were inseparable. We studied together at the library, explored Portland's food cart scene, spent long evenings walking through the city talking about our futures. Marcus introduced me to authors I'd never heard of, Murakami, Bukowski, Joan Didion, while I showed him hidden corners of Portland he'd never discovered despite living in Oregon his whole life. The physical attraction was undeniable, but what really hooked me was the way Marcus made me feel like the most interesting person in any room. He remembered every story I told him, asked follow-up questions about conversations we'd had weeks earlier, made me feel like my thoughts and dreams were worth his attention. We spent Christmas break texting constantly while he visited his relatives in California, and I worked extra shifts at the diner to help my parents with bills. The night he got back to Portland, he showed up at my apartment with takeout from my favorite Thai place and a vintage copy of On the Road he'd found at a used bookstore in San Francisco. "I saw this and thought of you," he said, showing me the inscription he'd written on the first page. "For Sarah, who's going to change the world one student at a time. Love, Marcus." Love. It was the first time either of us had used the word, and it hung in the air between us like a promise. That night, curled up in my tiny apartment with Thai food containers scattered around us and Kerouac playing softly in the background, Marcus traced patterns on my bare shoulder and told me about his plans for the future. "I want to start my own consulting firm," he said. "Something that helps small businesses develop their online presence. I've been doing some freelance work already and I think there's real potential there." "That sounds amazing. You'd be so good at that. The only problem is startup capital. I'd need at least $50,000 to really do it right. Office space, equipment, marketing, living expenses while I build a client base." "That's a lot of money." "Yeah, it is. My parents have offered to help, but I don't want to be dependent on them. I want to do this on my own, you know?" I understood the desire for independence, even if $50,000 seemed impossibly huge to someone like me who counted every dollar and still came up short most months. "You'll figure it out," I said. "You're the smartest person I know." He kissed the top of my head. "What about you? What's the plan after graduation?" "Student teaching, then hopefully a job somewhere in the Portland area. Elementary school, I think. 3rd or 4th grade. You're going to be incredible. Those kids won't know what hit them." We talked until sunrise about our dreams, our plans, our shared future. Marcus painted pictures of success and adventure, of the consulting firm he'd build and the travel we'd do together once he was established. I dreamed more modestly of a classroom filled with eager young faces, of making a difference in children's lives, of building something stable and meaningful. Looking back now, I can see how different our dreams were, how his were all about achievement and recognition while mine were about service and stability. But at the time, wrapped up in his arms in my tiny apartment, those differences felt romantic rather than problematic. I thought we balanced each other out. His ambition pushing me to dream bigger, my groundedness keeping him tethered to what really mattered. Spring semester brought new challenges. Marcus was taking 18 credit hours while working part-time at a local startup, trying to gain experience in the business world while finishing his degree. I was student teaching at a nearby elementary school while waitressing nights and weekends. We were both exhausted most of the time, stealing moments together between our packed schedules. But when we were together, everything else faded away. Marcus had this way of making ordinary moments feel special. Turning grocery shopping into an adventure, making studying at the library feel like a romantic date, transforming my cramped apartment into our own private world where anything was possible. He started staying over more nights than not, keeping a toothbrush in my bathroom and a change of clothes in my closet. My neighbors got used to seeing his beat-up Honda Civic parked outside, and Mrs. Patterson from upstairs started asking me how that nice young man was doing. In April, Marcus got an interview for a summer internship at a tech company in San Jose. It was exactly the kind of opportunity he'd been hoping for. A chance to work with successful entrepreneurs, to learn about the tech industry from the inside, to make connections that could help him launch his own business someday. "It's only 3 months, he said when he told me about the interview. "And Sarah, this could change everything for us. The salary is good, the experience would be incredible, and there are rumors that they sometimes offer permanent positions to standout interns." "That sounds like an amazing opportunity," I said, trying to hide my disappointment about spending the summer apart. "You could visit. San Jose isn't that far from Portland." "With what money?" I laughed, but there was an edge to it. I'll be working double shifts all summer to save up for fall tuition. Right. Of course. Marcus looked guilty for a moment, but then his excitement took over again. But Sarah, this could be the start of everything we've talked about. If I can get my foot in the door at a company like this, make the right connections, learn how successful people think and operate. I understood his excitement, I really did. But there was something about the way he talked about his future, our supposed shared future, that made me feel like an afterthought, like someone who would be there when he got back rather than someone he couldn't bear to leave behind. So I supported him. I helped him prepare for the interview, listened to him practice his pitch, celebrated with him when he got the internship. When May came and it was time for him to leave for San Jose, I kissed him goodbye and promised to call every day. For the first month we did talk every day. Marcus would tell me about his work, the people he was meeting, the projects he was working on. I told him about my summer job at a day camp, the kids I was working with, the lesson plans I was developing for the fall. But gradually the calls became less frequent. Marcus was working long hours, going to networking events, immersing himself in the Silicon Valley culture. When we did talk, he seemed distracted, his mind clearly still on work even when he was supposedly focused on our conversation. I miss you, I told him during one late-night call in early July. I miss you too, he said, but it sounded automatic, like something he thought he should say rather than something he felt deeply. Do you think you'll take the permanent position if they offer it to you? There was a pause. We'd have to talk about that. I mean, it would be an incredible opportunity, but I know it would mean changes for both of us. Changes. As if my entire life would need to be restructured around his career opportunities. By August, our conversations had dwindled to quick text messages and the occasional rushed phone call. Marcus was completely absorbed in his internship and I was starting to feel like a burden rather than a girlfriend. When he finally came back to Portland for the last 2 weeks before fall semester started, something had shifted between us. He was different. More confident, more polished, full of stories about the successful people he'd met and the deals he'd witnessed. He name-dropped tech executives like they were old friends and talked about business strategies I didn't understand. The Marcus who had sat with me in coffee shops discussing philosophy and dreams had been replaced by someone who seemed to be auditioning for a role in a world I didn't recognize. You seem different, I told him one night as we lay in bed in my apartment. Different how? More, I don't know. Intense. Focused. Like you're always thinking about work even when you're here with me. Marcus turned to face me, running his fingers through my hair. I'm sorry. You're right. It's just that this summer opened my eyes to so many possibilities. I feel like I finally have a clear vision of what I want my life to look like. And what does that look like? He painted another picture of success. The consulting firm he'd start, the clients he'd work with, the lifestyle he'd build. But as I listened, I realized that while his dreams had become more specific and concrete over the summer, I had somehow become more abstract in them. He talked about when I'm successful, and once I'm established without clearly including me in those scenarios. Still, when he reached for me that night, when he whispered that he loved me and had missed me, I let myself believe that we were still on the same path. I told myself that his ambition was attractive, that his drive would benefit both of us in the long run, that love would be enough to bridge whatever gaps were growing between us. 3 weeks into fall semester I realized I was pregnant. I stared at the pregnancy test in the fluorescent lighting of my apartment bathroom, my hands shaking as the reality sank in. Marcus and I had been careful most of the time, but there had been a few nights when passion had overridden caution, when the moment had felt too perfect to interrupt with practical concerns. I took 3 more tests over the next 2 days, hoping the first one had been wrong. But the results were consistent, undeniable. I was pregnant with Marcus Chen's baby, and suddenly all those dreams we'd shared about the future took on an entirely different meaning. I rehearsed the conversation for days before finally asking Marcus to meet me at our old spot, the coffee shop where we'd first talked, where everything had started. Looking back, I think I chose that location because I wanted to remind us both of how we'd begun, of the connection we'd felt, of the love that had brought us to this moment. But Marcus wasn't thinking about beginnings when I told him. He was thinking about endings. Are you sure it's mine? Those were the first words out of his mouth, and they cut deeper than any physical blow could have. After a year of being together, after all the nights he'd spent in my bed and all the dreams we'd shared, his first instinct was to question my faithfulness. Of course it's yours, I whispered, my voice breaking. Marcus, how can you even ask that? He was already reaching for his jacket, already backing away from the table like I was contagious. I can't do this, Sarah. I'm barely keeping my head above water. I can't be a father. I won't. The rest of that conversation was a blur of desperate pleas and cold rejections. I begged him to slow down, to think about it, to remember that we talked about having a family someday. He reminded me that someday wasn't supposed to be now, when he had no money and no established career and no ability to support a child. But we could figure it out together, I said, reaching across the table for his hands. He pulled away like my touch burned him. No, Sarah. We can't. This isn't my problem. And then he was gone, leaving me sitting there with my untouched coffee and my shattered dreams and the growing certainty that I was about to become a single mother at 21. The Marcus I'd fallen in love with, the one who'd brought me vintage books and talked about changing the world, had disappeared completely, replaced by a stranger who could walk away from the woman he claimed to love and the child they'd created together. That was 12 years ago. And now, staring at his Facebook friend request in the middle of the night, I couldn't help but remember the boy who'd traced patterns on my shoulder and promised me forever, before forever became too complicated and expensive for him to handle. Marcus disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant. I remember that conversation like it was yesterday, even though it happened in 2012. We were sitting in that little coffee shop on Burnside Street, the one with the chipped mugs and the owner who always smelled like cigarettes. I'd practiced the words for days, but when the moment came they tumbled out all wrong. I'm pregnant, I'd whispered, watching his face drain of color. He set his coffee cup down so hard it sloshed onto the scarred wooden table. Are you sure it's mine? Those words, God, those words still cut deep. I was 21, working 2 part-time jobs to pay for community college, living in a studio apartment with a broken heater. But I'd never been with anyone else. He knew that. He'd been my first everything. Of course it's yours, I'd said, my voice breaking. Marcus, we need to talk about. I can't do this, Sarah. He was already reaching for his jacket, already backing away from the table like I was contagious. I'm barely keeping my head above water. I can't be a father. I won't. But we could figure it out together. No. The finality in his voice was like a slap. No, we can't. This isn't my problem. He left me sitting there, staring at my untouched hot chocolate, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. When I tried calling him the next day, his number was disconnected. When I went to his apartment, the landlord told me he'd moved out overnight, left no forwarding address. For months, I held on to this naive hope that he'd come back. That he'd realize he was making a mistake, that love, whatever we'd had, would conquer his fear. I even left messages with his friends, his co-workers at that auto shop where he'd been working. Nothing. Radio silence. So I did what any terrified young woman would do. I figured it out myself. I dropped out of school temporarily, picked up more hours at the diner where I waitressed, and prepared to raise my baby alone. I told my parents the father wasn't in the picture, and they were supportive in their own complicated way. My mother, bless her heart, moved in with me during my last trimester, helping me set up the tiny nursery in the corner of my studio apartment. Then I met David. It was at the hospital of all places. I was 36 weeks pregnant, there for a routine checkup, when I locked my keys in my car in the parking lot. I was standing there in the rain, huge and exhausted and trying not to cry, when this gentle voice behind me said, "Hey, are you okay?" David was finishing his residency in pediatrics. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and when he saw my situation he didn't hesitate to help. He called a locksmith, waited with me in the hospital lobby until they arrived, and bought me a hot chocolate from the vending machine when I started shivering. "When are you due?" he'd asked, settling into the plastic chair beside me. "For weeks," I'd said, rubbing my belly absently. "It's just me, so I'm trying to get everything organized before she arrives." Emma Grace, I'd said, and I'll never forget the smile that crossed his face. "That's beautiful. She's lucky to have you." We talked for 2 hours while waiting for that locksmith. I told him about my plans to go back to school, about my dreams of becoming a teacher, about how scared but excited I was to meet my daughter. He told me about his residency, about growing up in a small town in eastern Oregon, about his passion for helping kids. There was something so steady about him, so reassuringly calm, that I found myself relaxing for the first time in months. When Emma was born 6 weeks later, 3 weeks early, tiny but perfect, David was the second person I called, right after my mother. I don't know why. Something about that night in the hospital had created a connection, a friendship that felt precious and rare. He came to visit us in the hospital, bringing flowers and a stuffed elephant that Emma still sleeps with. He held her with the practiced ease of someone who'd delivered hundreds of babies, and when she wrapped her tiny fingers around his pinky, something shifted in his expression. "She's perfect, Sarah," he'd whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Over the next few months, David became a constant presence in our lives. He'd stop by after his shifts, sometimes bringing dinner, sometimes just to check on us. He taught me how to give Emma a proper bath, how to recognize the difference between her hungry cry and her tired cry. When she got her first cold at 2 months old, he was the one who reassured me that her breathing was normal, that the sniffles would pass. "You don't have to do all this," I told him one evening when Emma was about 4 months old. He was sitting on my couch, bottle feeding her while I folded laundry, looking for all the world like he belonged there. "I know I don't have to," he'd said, not looking up from Emma's face. "I want to." We were married when Emma was 18 months old, and David formally adopted her when she turned 3. The paperwork was straightforward since Marcus had never been listed on her birth certificate. He'd made his choice clear and I'd made mine accordingly. David has been Emma's father in every way that matters. He's the one who taught her to throw a baseball, who helped her with her science fair project on volcanoes, who stays up late helping her practice for school plays. When other kids talk about their dads at soccer games or school events, Emma talks about David with the same pride and love. But now Marcus wants back in. His message, when it finally came through after I accepted his friend request 3 sleepless nights later, was everything I'd expected and nothing I was prepared for. "Sarah, I know I have no right to contact you after all these years, but I need to talk about Emma. I can see from your photos that she's grown into a beautiful young woman, and I can see David has been a good father to her. But she's my blood, Sarah. My flesh. My seed. I was young and stupid and scared, but I'm different now. I have a successful consulting firm, a house in Bellevue, stability. I want to be part of her life. I want to know my daughter. Please don't shut me out. I know our culture says that when a man denies his child and another man steps in to raise that child as his own, the biological father loses his claim. But this is different. This is my daughter. I have rights, don't I? Legal rights. Paternal rights? I'm not trying to take her away from you or David, but I deserve a chance to know her. She deserves to know where she comes from. What would you do if you were in my shoes?" I read that message 17 times before showing it to David. We sat at our kitchen table at midnight, Emma asleep upstairs, trying to process what this meant for our family. "He abandoned you," David said quietly, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. "He made his choice. I know. Emma doesn't know he exists. I know. She's happy. We're happy. She has a father who loves her. I know." My voice cracked on the words. David reached across the table and took my hand. "But you're wondering if she has a right to know about him." That was the question keeping me awake at night, the question that made my stomach churn every time I looked at Emma's face. Did she have a right to know about Marcus? Did he have a right to know her? And what about the rights I'd built over 12 years of scraped knees and bedtime stories, of being the only parent who showed up? The next message came 2 days later, after I hadn't responded to his first one. "Sarah, I know you're reading these. I can see when you're online. Please don't ignore me. I've been thinking about Emma every day for 12 years. Not a birthday has passed that I didn't wonder what she looked like, what she was interested in, whether she was happy. I know I messed up. I know I was a coward. But I want to make it right now. I want to be the father I should have been from the beginning. I'm not asking to disrupt her life or confuse her. I just want a chance. One conversation. Please." I found myself scrolling through his Facebook profile obsessively, looking for clues about who he'd become. The photos showed a life of success and apparent fulfillment. Expensive restaurants, business trips to New York and Los Angeles, a sleek apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. In recent photos he was often alone, no wedding ring, no hints of a family of his own. Had he been thinking about Emma all these years while I was building a life without him? The third message was different. More desperate. "I hired a lawyer, Sarah. I don't want to go that route, but I will if you won't talk to me. I know Emma was born in Portland and I know Oregon law. I may have given up my rights when I walked away, but I was young and scared, And no court ever officially terminated my parental rights because I was never on the birth certificate to begin with. That was my mistake, but it might also be my opportunity now. I don't want to put Emma through a legal battle, and I don't want to hurt your family. But I also won't be shut out of my daughter's life anymore. Please call me. We need to talk. That's when I knew I couldn't handle this alone anymore. I called my sister Jessica first. She's a family law attorney in Eugene, and I needed to understand what we were really dealing with. The legal situation is complicated, she told me after I'd explained everything. Because Marcus was never on the birth certificate and David legally adopted Emma, Marcus would have an uphill battle in court. But it's not impossible, especially if he can prove paternity through DNA and argue that he was denied the opportunity to assert his parental rights. What does that mean for Emma? That depends on a lot of factors. Her age, her wishes, the stability of her current situation, the court's assessment of what's in her best interests. At 12, her voice would carry some weight, but she's not old enough to make the decision entirely on her own. And culturally, he mentioned something about culture, saying he lost his claim when David adopted her. Jessica was quiet for a moment. In many traditional perspectives, yes. When a man abandons his child and another man steps in to raise that child as his own, the biological father forfeits his claim. The idea is that fatherhood is about presence and commitment, not just biology. But in the legal system it's more complex. Biology does carry weight, even when the biological parent has been absent. That night, I lay in bed listening to David's steady breathing beside me and Emma's occasional movement in the room next door, and I felt the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on my chest. What would I do if I were in Marcus's shoes? The honest answer terrified me. I would probably fight for my child too. But I wasn't in his shoes. I was in mine. The shoes of a mother who had built a beautiful, stable life for her daughter with a man who had chosen us when Emma's biological father had chosen to disappear. I was wearing the shoes of someone who had to protect not just Emma but David, who had given his heart completely to a child who wasn't biologically his, and who deserved better than to have his family torn apart by someone who was now convenient ready to be a father. Emma came downstairs for breakfast the next morning humming some song from TikTok, her hair in the messy bun that had become her signature look this year. She kissed David on the cheek and grabbed a piece of toast, chattering about her upcoming science test and whether we could get pizza for dinner. "Mom, you look tired," she said, pausing in her teenage whirlwind to actually look at me. "Are you okay?" I managed a smile. "Just work stuff, honey. Nothing for you to worry about." But as I watched her interact with David, the easy affection, the inside jokes, the way she automatically reached for him when she needed help opening a stubborn jam jar, I knew that whatever decision I made would change everything. The question wasn't whether Marcus deserved a chance to know Emma. The question was whether Emma deserved to have her world turned upside down to give him that chance. Marcus's fourth message arrived that afternoon while I was picking Emma up from soccer practice. "Sarah, I'm driving down to Portland this weekend. I'll be at Powell's Books on Burnside at 2 p.m. on Saturday. The same place where we used to study together when we were dating. If you'll meet me, we can talk about this like adults. If you don't show up, I'll file papers with the court on Monday morning. This doesn't have to be a battle, but I won't be ignored anymore. Emma deserves to know her biological father, and I deserve the chance to know her. 12 years is long enough." I stared at the message until the words blurred together, my hands shaking as I held the phone. Emma was in the passenger seat beside me, headphones in, completely oblivious to the bomb that was about to explode our carefully constructed life. "Mom?" The lights green. I pressed the gas pedal and drove us home, my mind racing through possibilities and consequences and all the ways this could go wrong. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I'd made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. I would meet him. Not because he deserved it and not because I believed his claims about Emma needing to know him. I would meet him because I needed to look him in the eye and understand who he'd become, what he really wanted, and whether there was any way to protect my family from the chaos he was threatening to bring into our lives. That night, after Emma had gone to bed and David was grading papers in his study, I sat in our living room and tried to imagine how to explain to my daughter that the man she called Dad wasn't her biological father, and that somewhere out there was a stranger who shared her DNA and now wanted to be part of her life. I looked at the family photos covering our mantle. Emma's first steps, her kindergarten graduation, family vacations to the Oregon coast, Christmases and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday nights that had been made special simply by being together. In every single photo David was there. Emma's honorary father who had become her real father in every way that mattered. Marcus wasn't in any of these pictures because Marcus had chosen not to be in any of these moments. He'd chosen his freedom, his unencumbered 20s, his ability to walk away from responsibility. And now that Emma was past the difficult years, past the sleepless nights and diaper changes and toddler tantrums, he wanted to waltz back in and claim his biological rights? The anger that thought triggered surprised me with its intensity. For 12 years I'd made peace with Marcus's abandonment. I'd forgiven him, moved on, built something beautiful from the ashes of his rejection. But now, faced with his sudden reappearance and demands, all of that old hurt came flooding back. How dare he? How dare he show up now when Emma was almost a teenager, when the hard work of early childhood was done, when she was becoming interesting and independent and fun to be around? Where was he when she was colicky and I was walking the floors at 3 a.m., exhausted and alone? Where was he when she needed surgery for her appendicitis at age 7, when I sat in that hospital waiting room praying she'd be okay? Where was he for the scraped knees and broken hearts and all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that make up a childhood? But underneath the anger was something else, something that made my stomach twist with guilt. The recognition that Emma might actually want to know about him. She was getting to an age where she was starting to ask bigger questions about identity and belonging. What if she'd been wondering about her biological father and just hadn't known how to ask? What if keeping this from her was robbing her of something important? I pulled out my laptop and started researching everything I could find about parental rights in Oregon, about biological fathers who abandoned their children and later tried to claim custody, about the psychological impact on children who discover late in life that the man they called dad wasn't their biological father. The information was overwhelming and contradictory. Some studies suggesting that knowing biological parents was crucial for identity development. Others showing that stable, loving adoptive relationships were more important than genetic connections. At 1:17 a.m. I sent Marcus a response. I'll be there Saturday at 2 p.m. But this conversation happens on my terms. You get 1 hour to explain yourself and then I decide what's best for Emma and for my family. You walk away once. You don't get to dictate the terms now. His reply came within minutes. Thank you. I know this is hard and I know I don't deserve your consideration. But thank you for giving me a chance. The rest of the week passed in a blur of ordinary activities that felt anything but ordinary. I helped Emma with her math homework while mentally rehearsing what I would say to Marcus. I made dinner and listened to David talk about his patients while wondering how to tell him I was meeting with Emma's biological father. I folded laundry and paid bills and did all the mundane tasks that keep a household running, all while carrying this enormous secret that felt like it might explode at any moment. Friday night I finally told David about the meeting. You're going alone? He asked, his face carefully neutral in the way it got when he was trying to control his emotions. I think that's best, at least for this first conversation. And then what? If he convinces you he's changed, if he makes a good case for wanting to know Emma, then what? It was the question I'd been avoiding all week. I don't know. David was quiet for a long moment, staring out our bedroom window at the suburban street where Emma had learned to ride her bike, where she'd grown up safe and loved and certain of her place in the world. She's my daughter too, Sarah, he said finally. Whatever you decide, whatever happens, she's my daughter too. I know, I whispered. I know she is. Saturday morning dawned gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that matched my mood perfectly. I dropped Emma off at her friend Madison's house for a sleepover, kissed David goodbye with a promise to call him afterward, and drove into the city with my heart pounding. Powell's books on Burnside looked exactly the same as it had 12 years ago, which somehow made everything feel more surreal. I found Marcus in the philosophy section just like old times, and for a moment I was transported back to those early days of our relationship when we were both community college students trying to figure out our lives. He looked older obviously, but the years had been kind to him. The boy I'd once loved was still visible in his features, but there was a confidence now, a polish that spoke of success and security. He was wearing dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. Sarah. He stood when he saw me, and for an awkward moment I thought he might try to hug me. Instead, he gestured toward a quiet corner where we could talk. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. I sat down across from him, maintaining careful distance. You have 1 hour, Marcus. Explain to me why you think you have any right to disrupt Emma's life now. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was softer than I'd expected. I think about her every day, Sarah. I know you don't believe that, and I know I don't deserve credit for thinking about a child I abandoned. But it's true. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone I imagined she might be reaching, I thought about her. Thinking about her isn't the same as being there for her. I know that. God, I know that. He rubbed his hands over his face, and for a moment he looked like the scared 21-year-old I'd once known. I was a coward, Sarah. I was terrified and broke and completely unprepared to be anyone's father. I convinced myself that walking away was the kindest thing I could do, that she'd be better off without me. She was better off without you. She had David. And I'm glad she had David. I can see from your Facebook photos that he's been a good father to her, that she's happy and healthy and loved. I'm not trying to replace him or take her away from him. Then what do you want? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. I want to know her. I want her to know where she comes from. I want to be part of her life, even if it's just a small part. I know I don't deserve it, but Sarah, she's my daughter. My flesh and blood. Doesn't that count for something? Your flesh and blood? The phrase triggered something hot and angry in my chest. You keep saying that like biology is what makes someone a parent. David is the one who walked the floors with her when she was sick. David is the one who taught her to tie her shoes and helped her with her homework and held her when she cried because kids at school were mean to her. David earned the right to call her his daughter. You contributed sperm 12 years ago. That doesn't make you her father. Marcus flinched like I'd slapped him. I know that. I know David has been her father in all the ways that matter. But I'm her biological parent, and that has to count for something too. She has a right to know her medical history, her genetic background. She has a right to know why she has your eyes instead of David's, why she's good at math when neither you nor David are particularly analytical. How do you know she's good at math? I may have looked into her school records. I know people. The casual way he said it, like stalking my daughter, was perfectly reasonable, made my vision go red around the edges. You investigated my daughter without my permission? Our daughter. And yes, I did some research. I wanted to understand who she was becoming, what her interests were, whether she seemed happy. I know she's on the honor roll, that she plays soccer, that she's in the drama club. I know she volunteers at the animal shelter with David on weekends, and that her favorite subject is science. I know she's growing into an amazing young woman, and I want to be part of that. You want to be part of the fun parts now that David has done all the hard work. Marcus's composure finally cracked. That's not fair, Sarah. Yes, I made a mistake 12 years ago, the biggest mistake of my life. But I can't change that now. All I can do is try to be the father she deserves going forward. The father she deserves? She already has the father she deserves. She has David. And she can keep David. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I just want a relationship with her too. Other kids have stepfathers and biological fathers. It doesn't have to be either-or. Other kids don't find out at 12 years old that their entire understanding of their identity was a lie. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying my face. You never told her about me at all, did you? She doesn't know David adopted her. The question hung between us like an accusation. Because no, I'd never told Emma about Marcus. David and I had talked about it countless times over the years, planning to have that conversation when she was older, when she could better understand the complexities of adult relationships and the difference between biological parents and real parents. But somehow it never felt like the right time. Emma was so secure in her identity as David's daughter, so confident in her family structure, that introducing the concept of a biological father who had abandoned her seemed cruel and unnecessary. She's happy, I said finally. She knows she's loved. That's what matters. But she doesn't know the truth. The truth is that David is her father in every way that matters. The truth is that you chose not to be part of her life when she needed you most. The truth is also that I'm her biological father, and she has a right to know that. Marcus's voice was getting stronger, more insistent. Sarah, I'm not going to go away quietly this time. I've spent 12 years regretting the biggest mistake of my life, and I won't spend the next 12 years wondering what might have been if I'd fought for my daughter. Your daughter. I stood up, my hour nearly over and my patience completely exhausted. You lost the right to call her that when you walked away. Emma is not your daughter, Marcus. She's David's daughter and my daughter. You're a stranger who happens to share her DNA. A stranger who could provide her with a trust fund for college, who could introduce her to opportunities and connections that a pediatrician's salary might not cover, who could. Who could what? Buy her love? Make up for 12 years of absence with money and privilege. I was aware that my voice was rising, that other people in the bookstore were starting to stare, but I couldn't stop myself. You think Emma needs your money? You think what she's missing in her life is a father with more expensive clothes and a bigger house? I think what she's missing is half her genetic identity and a father who can give her opportunities beyond what she has now. She has everything she needs. She has parents who love her, a stable home, a bright future. What she doesn't need is some stranger showing up and confusing her about her identity because he's finally ready to play daddy. Marcus stood too, his face flushed. I'm not some stranger. I am her biological father and I have rights. Legal rights and moral rights. If you won't voluntarily allow me access to my daughter, I'll petition the court for visitation. I'll request DNA testing to establish paternity, and then we'll let a judge decide what's in Emma's best interests. You'll put her through that? You'll drag her into court and force her to choose between the only father she's ever known and a man who abandoned her before she was born. I'll do whatever I have to do to have a relationship with my daughter. And there was the line in the sand. Marcus was done asking permission. He was ready to demand his rights as Emma's biological father. And I was done pretending this was a reasonable request that deserved consideration. Then I guess we have nothing more to talk about, I said, grabbing my purse. But understand this, Marcus. Emma is not a prize to be won or a possession to be claimed. She's a real person with real feelings, and if you put her through the trauma of a custody battle because you've decided you're ready to be a father, you'll prove once and for all that you don't deserve to know her. I left him sitting there in the philosophy section surrounded by books about ethics and morality, and drove home with my hands shaking and my mind racing. David was waiting for me in the kitchen, a cup of tea already prepared. That bad? He asked, taking one look at my face. He's filing for visitation if I don't voluntarily give him access to Emma. David's face went very still. And Emma still doesn't know he exists. No. So we have a choice to make. Tell her about him ourselves or let her find out when a court summons arrives. I sank into a chair and buried my face in my hands. I don't know how to tell her, David. I don't know how to explain that the man she calls dad isn't her biological father without making her question everything about her identity, her family, her entire understanding of who she is. David came around the table and pulled me into his arms. We tell her the truth. That families are built on love, not just biology. That I chose to be her father and that choice means more than genetic accident. That she was wanted and loved from the moment she was born, and nothing about that changes whether her biological father is in the picture or not. What if she wants to know him? What if she's curious about him and feels like we've been lying to her all these years? Please hit the subscribe button, like and comment. Then we deal with that when it happens. But Sarah, we can't make decisions based on fear of what might happen. We have to trust that Emma is strong enough and smart enough to handle the truth, and that our relationship with her is solid enough to survive some confusion and questions. I wanted to believe him, but the fear was overwhelming. Emma was at such a crucial age, right on the brink of adolescence, when identity questions were already complicated enough without adding this massive revelation. How do you tell a 12-year-old that her entire understanding of her family was incomplete? How do you introduce the concept of a biological father who had walked away before she was born but now wanted back into her life? We decided to wait until Emma came home from her sleepover on Sunday afternoon, to give ourselves time to figure out how to approach the conversation. I spent Saturday night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and running through different ways to explain the situation. Every scenario I imagined ended with Emma feeling betrayed, confused, or angry, either at Marcus for abandoning her, at me for keeping the truth from her, or at David for not being her real father. Sunday morning, David made pancakes, Emma's favorite, and we tried to act normal while planning what might be the most difficult conversation of our lives. We tell her together, David said as we set the table. We make it clear that this doesn't change anything about our family, about how much we love her, about her place in our lives. And if she wants to meet him? Then we figure out how to make that happen in a way that protects her emotional well-being. And if she doesn't want to meet him? Then we support that decision and deal with Marcus's legal threats when they come. Emma bounced through the door at 2 p.m., full of stories about her sleepover and plans for the week ahead. She devoured the pancakes we'd kept warm for her and chattered about some drama involving her friend group that seemed monumentally important to her 12-year-old perspective. Watching her animated face, seeing her complete trust in us and security in her world, I almost lost my nerve. How could I be the one to introduce doubt and confusion into her life? How could I tell her that the foundation of her identity was more complicated than she'd ever imagined? But Marcus's threat was real, and if we didn't control this narrative, he would. If Emma was going to learn about her biological father, it needed to come from us, in our home, surrounded by love and reassurance. "Emma, honey, Dad and I need to talk to you about something important," I said when she'd finished eating. Her face immediately grew serious. "Am I in trouble?" "No, sweetheart. Nothing like that. It's just, there's something about our family that we need to explain to you, something we probably should have talked about before now." Emma looked back and forth between David and me, her expression wary. "What kind of something?" David reached over and took her hand. You know how much I love you, right? How you're the most important thing in the world to me." "Yeah, Dad. I love you too." "Good. Because nothing about that is going to change no matter what else we talk about today. You're my daughter and I'm your father, and that's not going to be different just because we're having this conversation." Emma's eyes widened slightly. "You're scaring me. What's going on?" I took a deep breath and jumped in. "Emma, when you were born it was just you and me at first. I was very young and your biological father, he wasn't ready to be a dad. He left before you were born." "My biological father?" Emma's voice was very small. "Yes. The man who helped create you with me. But then I met Dad when you were just a baby and he fell in love with both of us. He legally adopted you when you were 3 years old, which means he chose to be your father." "He chose you, Emma." Emma was staring at the table, processing. "So Dad isn't. I mean, we don't have the same DNA." "No, we don't," David said gently. "But DNA doesn't make someone your parent, Emma. Love makes someone your parent. Showing up every day makes someone your parent. Being there for scraped knees and bad dreams and good days and hard days, that's what makes someone your parent." "Where is he now?" "My biological father." This was the question I'd been dreading. "He lives in Seattle now. He's contacted me recently. He wants to meet you." Emma looked up sharply. "He wants to meet me? After all this time?" "Yes." "Why now?" It was such a perceptive question, and I found myself struggling to answer it in a way that wouldn't make Marcus sound completely selfish. "He says he's thought about you over the years, and now that he's older and more settled, he wants to be part of your life." "But he didn't want to be part of my life when I was little?" "No, honey. He didn't." Emma was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Do I look like him?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "You have his eyes," I admitted. "And his stubborn streak." "But I have your chin," David added quickly, "and your mom's sense of humor, and your own brilliant mind that doesn't belong to anyone but you." Emma nodded slowly. "I don't understand why he left, but I understand why you didn't tell me before. I think it would have been confusing when I was little." "Are you angry at us for not telling you sooner?" I asked. "No. Maybe a little confused but not angry. You were protecting me, right?" "We were trying to," David said. "But now he's threatening to go to court if we don't let him see you, and we thought you should know what's happening instead of being surprised by legal papers." Emma's face hardened in a way that reminded me startlingly of Marcus. "He's threatening to take you to court?" "Not to take you away from us," I said quickly. "Just to get visitation rights. To spend time with you." "And if I don't want to spend time with him?" David and I exchanged glances. "That's your choice, Em. You're old enough to have a voice in this." Emma was quiet again, thinking. Finally, she said, "Can I ask you guys something?" "Anything." "If I wanted to meet him just once just to see what he's like, would that hurt your feelings? Would you think I was being disloyal to Dad?" My heart broke a little at the careful way she asked the question, trying to protect David's feelings while processing her own curiosity. "Oh, sweetheart," David said, "being curious about your biological father doesn't make you disloyal to me. It makes you human. If you want to meet him, we'll figure out how to make that happen safely." But if I don't want to meet him, you'll support that too? Absolutely. Emma nodded, looking relieved. I think I need some time to process all this before I decide anything. Is that okay? Of course it's okay, I said. Take all the time you need. But even as I said it, I knew time was something we might not have. Marcus had given us until Monday before he filed papers, and it was already Sunday afternoon. That evening, after Emma had gone to her room to do homework and think about stuff, David and I sat in our living room and tried to figure out our next steps. She handled it better than I expected, David said. She's processing. The real emotions will come later when it all sinks in. Do you think she'll want to meet him? I think she's curious, which is natural. The question is whether we can trust Marcus to handle that meeting appropriately, without pressuring her or making promises he won't keep. My phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus, of course. I hope you've thought about our conversation. I meant what I said about filing papers tomorrow if I don't hear from you. I don't want to put Emma through a court battle, but I will if that's what it takes. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. I showed David the message and he shook his head in disgust. He's using Emma as leverage. Threatening to traumatize her with a legal battle unless you give him what he wants. I know. But David, what if he's right? What if she does have a right to know her biological father? What if we're the ones being selfish by trying to keep them apart? Sarah, look at me. David took my hands, his expression serious. Emma is our daughter. We've raised her, loved her, been there for every moment of her life. If she wants to know Marcus, we'll support that. But we don't owe him anything, and we don't have to give him access to her just because he's decided he's ready to be a father. I wanted to believe him, but the doubt was eating at me. What if Emma grew up and resented us for keeping her from her biological father? What if she felt like we'd robbed her of the chance to have a relationship with him during her formative years? On the other hand, what if we introduced Marcus into her life and he hurt her the way he'd hurt me? What if he made promises he couldn't keep, or decided being a father was too complicated and walked away again? Monday morning came too quickly. I dropped Emma off at school with a heavy heart, watching her walk into the building with her backpack slung over one shoulder, looking like any other 12-year-old heading to another ordinary day. She had no idea that her biological father might be filing legal papers that very morning, papers that could turn her world upside down. I was at work trying to focus on the quarterly budget report when my phone rang. Marcus, have you made a decision? He asked without preamble. Emma knows about you now. We told her yesterday. There was silence on the other end of the line. How did she take it? She's processing. She needs time to decide if she wants to meet you. Time is something I'm not willing to give anymore, Sarah. I've waited 12 years. You didn't wait 12 years. You disappeared for 12 years. There's a difference. I'm not going to argue semantics with you. I want to meet my daughter and I want it to happen soon. This week. That's not your decision to make. Actually, it might be. I spoke with my lawyer this morning. He thinks I have a strong case for establishing paternity and getting visitation rights, especially given that Emma is old enough to express her own preferences. The threat was clear and I felt that familiar surge of anger. So you're going to force this? You're going to drag her into court because you can't wait for her to make her own decision. I'm going to do whatever it takes to have a relationship with my daughter. Then you haven't changed at all, have you? You're still the same selfish person who walked away 12 years ago. You're just selfish in a different direction now. I'm her father, Sarah. No, Marcus. You're her sperm donor. David is her father. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with rage and fear. Within minutes, my phone buzzed with a text. Papers will be filed by end of business today. I'm sorry it has to be this way, but you've left me no choice. I called Jessica immediately. He's actually filing? My sister asked when I explained the situation. Apparently. What does this mean for Emma? What does this mean for our family? It means you need to lawyer up fast. I can refer you to someone in Portland who specializes in family law. But Sarah, I have to ask, is there any possibility that allowing supervised visits might be better than fighting this in court? You think I should give in to his threats? I think you should consider what's truly best for Emma. Court battles are traumatic for kids, especially kids her age. If Marcus is determined to push this, you might minimize the damage by agreeing to limited, supervised contact rather than fighting it entirely. The idea made my stomach turn, but I could see the logic. A messy legal battle would definitely harm Emma, while carefully controlled meetings with Marcus might not, especially if she was curious about him anyway. That evening I sat Emma down again. Honey, I need to tell you something else. Your biological father has decided he can't wait for you to make a decision about meeting him. He's filing legal papers to force the issue. Emma's face went pale. He's taking us to court? He's asking a judge to give him the right to spend time with you, even if we don't want him to. Can he do that? Maybe. The law is complicated when it comes to biological parents and adopted children. Emma was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. I don't want to go to court. I don't want strangers deciding things about my life. Then what do you want to do? Maybe I could meet him once. Just to see what he's like. Would that make him stop with the court stuff? My heart sank, but I tried to keep my voice neutral. Might. If you met him and decided you didn't want an ongoing relationship, he might accept that more easily than if we never gave him a chance at all. And you and Dad would be there? If you wanted us to be. Emma nodded slowly. I think I want to meet him. Not because I want him to be my dad or anything. Dad is my dad. But because I'm curious. And because I don't want him to be able to say we never gave him a chance. That night I called Marcus back. Emma has agreed to meet you, I said without preamble. Once. With David and me present. If after that meeting she decides she doesn't want an ongoing relationship, you respect that decision and drop the legal threats. And if she does want an ongoing relationship? Then we figure out what that looks like together with her best interests as the priority. When? This weekend. Saturday afternoon, somewhere public. I'll take it, Marcus said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Thank you, Sarah. I know this isn't easy. Don't thank me yet. Emma is smart and intuitive, and she's not easily impressed. If you're hoping to waltz back into her life and play Father of the Year, you're going to be disappointed. I just want a chance to know her. Then you'll have it. But Marcus, if you hurt her, if you make promises you can't keep, if you do anything to damage her emotional well-being, I will make sure you never get near her again. Legal rights or no legal rights. We arranged to meet at Laurelhurst Park on Saturday at 2 p.m. Neutral territory, public enough to be safe, with plenty of space for Emma to feel comfortable. The week dragged by. Emma was quieter than usual, clearly thinking about the upcoming meeting but not wanting to talk about it much. David was supportive but tense, trying to hide his own anxiety about introducing Marcus into our carefully constructed family dynamic. Thursday night, Emma knocked on our bedroom door after we'd gone to bed. Can I ask you guys something? Of course, sweetheart. She climbed onto our bed and sat cross-legged between us, looking younger than her 12 years. What if I like him? What if he's nice and I want to get to know him better? Will that hurt Dad's feelings? David reached over and smoothed her hair. Emma, you having a relationship with your biological father doesn't take anything away from our relationship. I'm not threatened by Marcus and I'm not worried about losing you to him. But what if he wants to be my dad too? Then we'll explain that you already have a dad who loves you very much, and while you might develop some kind of relationship with Marcus, that doesn't change your family or who your real parents are. Emma nodded, looking somewhat reassured. And what if I don't like him? What if he's mean or boring or just weird? Then you never have to see him again, I said firmly. This is your choice, Emma. Not his, not ours. Yours. Okay. She was quiet for a moment, then added, I keep wondering what it would have been like if he'd stayed. Like if you guys had gotten married and he'd been my dad instead of Dad. Do you ever wonder about that? The question caught me off guard. Sometimes. But I can't imagine any version of that story that would have been better than what we have now. Marcus and I, we weren't right for each other. We were too young, too different, too unprepared for the responsibility of raising a child. If he'd stayed, I think we all would have been miserable. But you loved him once, right? I thought I did. But real love isn't just feelings. It's commitment and reliability and showing up when things get hard. Marcus couldn't do those things when I needed him to. And Dad could. Dad chose to. Every single day he chooses to be your father and my husband and part of our family. That choice means everything. Emma smiled and leaned against David's shoulder. I'm glad he chose us. Me too, kiddo. Me too. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that matched my mood. We drove to Laurelhurst Park in relative silence, Emma fidgeting with the sleeves of her jacket, David drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, me trying to prepare for whatever this meeting would bring. Marcus was already there when we arrived, standing near the playground looking nervous and overdressed in his expensive jacket and perfectly styled hair. He spotted us immediately and raised his hand in an awkward wave. "He looks like a businessman," Emma observed as we walked toward him. "He is a businessman," I replied. "He owns a consulting firm." "He looks nervous." "He probably is. This is a big deal for him too." We reached Marcus and for a moment nobody seemed to know what to say. He was staring at Emma with an expression of wonder and recognition that made my chest tight. "Hi Emma," he said finally, his voice soft. "I'm Marcus. It's so good to finally meet you." Emma studied his face with the direct, unself-conscious gaze that only children can manage. "Hi. Mom says I have your eyes." Marcus smiled and I could see tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. "You do. And your mom's beautiful smile." We found a picnic table and sat down awkwardly, Emma between David and me, Marcus across from us like he was applying for a job. "So," Emma said after a moment of silence, "why did you leave when Mom was pregnant with me?" The question was so direct, so typical of Emma's straightforward approach to life, that it caught all three adults off guard. Marcus looked like he'd been punched. That's a complicated question, Emma. I'm 12, not 4. I can handle complicated." Marcus glanced at me and I nodded slightly. She deserved honest answers. "I was scared," he said finally. "I was 21 years old, barely making enough money to support myself, and the idea of being responsible for a baby terrified me. I convinced myself that you and your mom would be better off without me." "But you were wrong," Emma said matter of fact. "I was wrong about a lot of things. I was wrong to leave, wrong to stay away, wrong to miss so many years of your life. Why do you want to know me now?" It was another direct hit and I found myself curious about his answer. "Because I've regretted leaving every single day for 12 years. Because I've wondered who you were becoming, what you were interested in, whether you were happy. Because you're my daughter and I want to be part of your life if you'll let me." Emma tilted her head, considering. "But I already have a dad." "I know you do. And from everything I can see, David is an amazing father. I'm not trying to replace him or take his place. I'd like to get to know you if that's something you'd be interested in." "What would that look like?" "Getting to know me." Marcus seemed relieved to be discussing practical details. "Maybe we could have lunch sometimes, or I could come to one of your soccer games. Maybe I could tell you about your medical history, your extended family, things like that. Whatever you'd be comfortable with." Emma looked at David. "What do you think, Dad?" The question was so trusting, so clearly seeking his approval that I saw Marcus flinch slightly. "I think that's entirely up to you. If you want to get to know Marcus better, I support that. If you don't, I support that too." Emma turned back to Marcus. "Do I have grandparents? Like your parents?" "You do. My parents live in Phoenix now. They retired there a few years ago. They don't know about you yet, but I know they'd love to meet you if you ever wanted to meet them." "What about brothers and sisters?" "I don't have any children besides you. No brothers or sisters for you on my side." Emma nodded, processing this information. "Are you married?" "No. I've never been married." "Do you have a girlfriend?" "Not currently." "Why not?" The question seemed to surprise Marcus. I guess I've been focused on my career mostly. Building my business, getting financially stable." "Are you lonely?" The simple question hit Marcus like a physical blow. I watched his face crumple slightly as he struggled to answer. "Sometimes, yes. I am lonely sometimes." Emma nodded like this made perfect sense to her. "I think that's sad. Everyone should have a family." "You're right. Everyone should." They talked for another hour. About Emma's interests, her school, her friends, her plans for high school. Marcus listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, clearly trying to memorize every detail. Emma was polite but guarded, treating him like a friendly stranger rather than a parent, which was exactly what he was. As we prepared to leave, Marcus asked the question I'd been dreading. "Could we do this again sometime? Maybe next weekend?" Emma looked at me, then at David, then back at Marcus. "Maybe. I need to think about it." "Of course. Take all the time you need. And if I decide I don't want to see you again, you won't be mad? You won't try to force me with court stuff?" Marcus's face went very serious. Emma, I promise you. If you decide you don't want a relationship with me, I'll respect that decision. I won't take your family to court or try to force anything. Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. Okay then. Maybe. We walked back to the car in silence, Emma lost in thought. Once we were driving home, she finally spoke. He seems nice enough. Kind of sad but nice. What did you think of him? I asked. Think he's telling the truth about regretting leaving us. I think he's lonely and feels bad about missing out on my childhood. But I also think. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I think he wants a relationship with me more for his sake than for mine. Like he needs to feel better about himself, you know? David and I exchanged glances. Emma's emotional intelligence never ceased to amaze me. Does that change how you feel about seeing him again? David asked. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I feel sorry for him, but that's not a good reason to have someone in your life, is it? Just because you feel sorry for them. No, sweetheart. Relationships should be based on genuine connection and mutual benefit, not guilt or obligation. Emma was quiet for the rest of the drive home. That evening she came into the kitchen while I was making dinner. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think he would have been a good dad if he'd stayed? The question stopped me cold. I'd spent 12 years trying not to think about that possibility, focusing instead on the reality of David's love and commitment. I honestly don't know, Emma. He was very different then. Younger, less mature, less stable. Maybe he would have grown into being a good father, or maybe he would have been resentful and unhappy. There's no way to know. But you don't think so, do you? Her perceptiveness was startling. No, I don't think so. I think if he'd stayed out of obligation rather than love, we all would have suffered for it. Emma nodded. That's what I think too. I think Dad is a better dad than Marcus would have been, even if Marcus had stayed. What makes you think that? Because Dad chose us. Marcus would have stayed because he felt like he had to, not because he wanted to. That's different. Over the next few days, Emma seemed to be working through her feelings about Marcus and the possibility of an ongoing relationship. She asked occasional questions, about my relationship with Marcus, about the early days with David, about what it meant to be adopted, but mostly she seemed to be processing internally. Thursday evening she made her decision. I want to see Marcus again, she announced over dinner. But not like a dad. More like, I don't know, a family friend or something. Someone I might have lunch with occasionally, who I can ask questions about genetics and family history. That sounds reasonable, David said. How do you feel about that arrangement? I think it could work. But I want to be clear with him that I'm not looking for another father. I have a father. And I want to make sure he understands that this is about satisfying my curiosity, not about building some big emotional relationship. I was both proud of and heartbroken by her mature approach to the situation. At 12 years old, she was handling this complex family dynamic with more grace than most adults would manage. Do you want us to be present when you see him again? For a while, yeah. Maybe eventually we could have lunch, just the two of us, but not yet. I'm not ready for that. We arranged another meeting with Marcus for the following Saturday, this time at a family restaurant where the atmosphere would be more relaxed. When I called to set it up, I was clear about Emma's boundaries. She's willing to get to know you as a person, but she's not looking for a father figure. He has that covered. If you're hoping to slide into some kind of parental role, you're going to be disappointed. I understand. I'm grateful for whatever relationship she's comfortable with. And Marcus? If you make promises you can't keep, if you hurt her feelings or disappoint her in any way, this ends immediately. She's being generous by giving you this chance at all. I know. I won't let her down. The second meeting went more smoothly than the first. Emma was more relaxed, asking Marcus about his work, his travels, his childhood. Marcus, for his part, seemed to understand the boundaries she'd set and didn't push for more intimacy than she was offering. Over the next few months, they settled into a routine of occasional meetings. Lunch once a month, attending one of Emma's soccer games, a phone call every couple of weeks. Marcus was respectful of our family dynamic, never undermining David's role or trying to position himself as anything more than Emma was comfortable with. Emma, meanwhile, seemed satisfied with the arrangement. She had her questions about her genetic background answered, enjoyed hearing stories about Marcus's side of the family, and appreciated having access to medical history information. But she never wavered in her understanding of who her real father was. 6 months after that first meeting in the park, Emma came home from lunch with Marcus with an interesting observation. "I think Marcus is seeing someone," she announced. "He seemed different today, happier, less sad. And he mentioned going to some art gallery opening with a friend named Rachel." "How do you feel about that?" I asked. "Good, I think. He's been so lonely and I always felt bad that I couldn't fix that for him. If he has someone else in his life, maybe he won't need so much from me." It was such a mature insight, and it revealed something I hadn't fully understood before. Emma had been carrying some responsibility for Marcus's emotional well-being, feeling guilty that she couldn't fill the void in his life. The possibility of him finding happiness elsewhere seemed to relieve that burden. A year after their first meeting, Marcus called with news that would change everything again. "I wanted you to hear this from me first," he said. "Rachel and I are engaged. We're getting married this summer." "Congratulations," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. "There's something else. Rachel has 2 children from her first marriage, a boy who's 10 and a girl who's 8. We're going to be a blended family." "How does Emma feel about that?" "I haven't told her yet. I wanted to talk to you first. But Sarah, I need you to know, this doesn't change how I feel about Emma. She'll always be important to me. But she won't be your only child anymore." "No, she won't." When I told Emma about Marcus's engagement and his fiancée's children, she was quiet for a long time. "So he's going to be a stepfather to kids who are younger than me?" "Yes." "Kids who will live with him and see him every day?" "I assume so, yes." Emma nodded slowly. "I think that's good for him. He wants to be a dad and now he'll get to be one for real." "How do you feel about having step-siblings?" "I don't think they'd really be my step-siblings. More like kids whose stepfather I happen to share some DNA with." Her ability to compartmentalize relationships and keep appropriate boundaries continued to amaze me. Marcus and Rachel were married in a small ceremony in Seattle that we didn't attend. Emma said she didn't feel comfortable being part of such an intimate family moment, and we respected her decision. But she sent a card and a gift, maintaining the cordial but distant relationship they'd established. Over the next year, Marcus's communications became less frequent. He was busy with his new family, establishing relationships with his stepchildren, navigating the complexities of a blended household. Emma didn't seem bothered by the decreased contact. If anything, she seemed relieved. "I think he got what he needed from our relationship," she told me one day. "He got to know me well enough to not feel guilty anymore about leaving, and now he has a real family to focus on." "Are you okay with that?" "Yeah, I am. I was never going to be his daughter in the way he wanted me to be. We both knew that. But at least now he has kids who can be his kids for real, and I don't have to carry the weight of his regret anymore." 2 years after their first meeting, Emma was 14 and firmly established in her identity as David's daughter and my daughter, with Marcus as an interesting but peripheral figure in her life. She saw him perhaps 4 times a year, usually for lunch or coffee, and they exchanged birthday and Christmas cards. It was a relationship that worked for both of them precisely because neither expected more from it than the other was willing to give. Looking back now, I think Emma's assessment was correct. Marcus needed that relationship with her more to assuage his own guilt than to truly father her. Once he had a family of his own to invest in, once he'd satisfied his curiosity about the daughter he'd abandoned and confirmed that she was thriving without him, he was able to move on. And Emma had gotten answers to her questions about her genetic background, satisfied her natural curiosity about her origins, and gained a broader understanding of the different ways families can be configured. But she never doubted who her real parents were, never questioned where she belonged, never wavered in her love for and loyalty to the man who had chosen to be her father when her biological father had chosen to walk away. If I had it to do over again, would I have handled things differently? Maybe I would have told Emma about Marcus earlier, prepared her gradually for the possibility that he might someday want to know her. Maybe I would have been less defensive, less protective, more willing to acknowledge that biology does create some legitimate claims and connections. But I don't regret fighting for my family. I don't regret protecting Emma from the chaos and confusion that Marcus's sudden reappearance could have caused. And I don't regret making sure she understood from the very beginning that families are built on love and commitment and daily choices, not just genetic accidents. Marcus asked me once what I would do if I were in his shoes. If I had a biological child being raised by another man, if I wanted back into that child's life after years of absence. The honest answer is that I would probably fight for my child too, just as fiercely as he fought for Emma. But I would also hope that I'd have the wisdom to recognize what was truly in my child's best interests, rather than just what would make me feel better about my past mistakes. I would hope I'd be willing to accept whatever relationship my child was comfortable with, rather than demanding the full parental relationship I'd forfeited through my own choices. And most of all, I would hope I'd be humble enough to understand that being a parent is about more than sharing DNA. It's about showing up, day after day, year after year, for all the ordinary moments that make up a childhood. It's about earning the right to call someone your child through consistency and commitment and unconditional love. Marcus contributed genetic material to Emma's creation, but David built her childhood. Marcus may have given Emma half her chromosomes, but David gave her security, stability, and the unwavering knowledge that she was wanted and loved. In the end, that's what made all the difference. Today, Emma is 16, thriving in high school, planning for college, and secure in her identity as our daughter. She still sees Marcus occasionally, maintains polite contact with his family, and speaks of him with affection but without the deep emotional attachment reserved for family. She calls David Dad without qualification or hesitation, refers to me and David as her parents when talking to friends, and has never shown any confusion about where she belongs. Sometimes I watch her interacting with David, seeking his advice about boys, asking for help with calculus homework, sharing inside jokes that have developed over years of shared experiences, and I'm overwhelmed with gratitude that things worked out the way they did. Not perfectly, not without complications and difficult conversations and moments of doubt, but ultimately in a way that preserved the family we built and honored the relationships that matter most. Marcus got his chance to know Emma, to satisfy his curiosity and ease his guilt. Emma got answers to her questions and a broader understanding of her own story. David and I got to keep the family we'd worked so hard to build. And most importantly, Emma got to keep the security and stability that had always been her birthright. Not because of biology but because of love. That's what I would tell anyone facing a similar situation. Fight for your family, protect your children, but also be willing to find ways to honor legitimate connections and relationships when you can do so without sacrificing what's most important. Trust your children to be wiser and more resilient than you might expect. And never forget that families are built on choice and commitment, not just genetic coincidence. That's the lesson that matters most. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment for more interesting topics.